Baikal is not a lake. It is a wound in the body of the planet, a gaping abyss that remembers a time when completely different creatures walked the earth. In 1991, in the most chaotic months of the collapse of the Soviet Union, an echo came from its icy depths that silenced even seasoned KGB officers. The last radiogram of the Neptune 7 research group consisted of only 2 words, but these words changed everything. They are here. After that, only silence, cold and deep, like the water of Baikal itself. This is the story of how submarine Captain Morozov descended into this silence to find the missing. And what he discovered there, something so ancient and powerful that any human secrets paled before it. Underscore. Captain First Rank Igor Morozov never liked Baikal. During his 20 years of service in the submarine fleet, he had sailed all the seas from the Barents to the Sea of Japan, but this lake always made him feel inexplicably uneasy. Too deep, too old, too alive. When you look at its endless expanses, you can't shake the feeling that something gigantic and patient is looking at you from the dark depths. So when he got a call from the center and was ordered to urgently come to the scientific station in the village of Lisvianka, he immediately understood that things were bad. October 1991 was a time when the country was falling apart, and no one was spending money on urgent underwater missions unless absolutely necessary. At the station, he was met by Lieutenant Colonel Glebov, a thin, nervous man with dull eyes. His office smelled of cheap tobacco and that special hopelessness that hung over all Soviet institutions in those last months. "Sit down, Igor Petrovich," Glebov said wearily, pointing to a shabby chair. "This is a serious matter, and strange." He took a thin folder from the safe and placed it on the table between them. 2 weeks ago, we lost a research group. 7 people, top-class specialists from a closed institute. They were working on the depth program, studying anomalous acoustic phenomena at the bottom of Lake Baikal. Morozov took the folder. On the cover was the stamp Top Secret and the code name Neptune 7. Inside were photographs of people in diving suits, equipment diagrams, and the final, fateful radio exchange protocol. They were looking for the source of the strange sounds, Glebov continued. Local fishermen have been telling tales about voices from the depths for years. We decided to check. What if the Americans installed some kind of equipment there to eavesdrop on our secrets? Morozov read the protocol. The first days of the expedition were ordinary. Descents to depths of 300, 400, 500 meters. Measurements, water samples, echolocation, everything according to plan. But then, day 6, 14:30, the group reached the 800-meter mark. An anomalous structure was discovered on the bottom. Preliminary man-made. We are taking additional measurements. Day 6, 16:15. The structure is huge. It looks like architecture, but not human. Age indeterminate. Archaeological consultation required. Day 7, 9 o'clock. Recording equipment picks up acoustic signals. Not random. Structured. Similar to speech. And then the final recording. The trembling voice of the group's leader, Dr. Semenov, breaking through the static. Day 7, 11:47. Base, this is Neptune 7. We are not alone here. They are here. I repeat, they are here. Over and out. After that, silence. Complete, absolute. As if the 7 people and their underwater vehicle had simply dissolved into the cold water. "Did you organize a rescue operation?" Morozov asked, not taking his eyes off the protocol. "We tried. but we don't have the equipment to go that deep. And private individuals, Glebov spread his hands. Who's going to work for Soviet rubles now? The country is falling apart, Captain. But the problem is that Neptune 7 didn't just disappear. We continue to receive signals from them. Morozov raised his head. What do you mean, signals? Glebov turned on an old tape recorder. A low, pulsating sound poured out of the speaker. Not music, not a scream, not the noise of technology. Something between the breathing of a sleeping giant and distant, echoing singing. This was recorded the day before yesterday, the lieutenant colonel said. The signal is coming from a depth of 800 meters, exactly from the place where they disappeared. But the strangest thing is, he stopped the recording and rewound a few seconds. Listen carefully. Morozov leaned toward the speaker. There was indeed something else in the hum. Faint, distorted, but recognizable sounds. Human voices. They were whispering something against the background of this cosmic singing. They were whispering in a language that Morozov did not understand, but which for some reason caused him to panic. Our linguists say that this is not one of the known dialects, Glebov continued. But there's a suspicion that this is a very old language. So old that it contains sounds that the human mouth should not be able to pronounce. Morozov turned off the tape recorder. Silence fell over the office, broken only by the noise of the wind outside the window and the distant splash of the waves of Lake Baikal. What is required of me? He asked. Go down, find them, or what's left of them, and find out what's going on at the bottom. We have an experimental deep-sea vehicle called Russ. It can go down 1.5 kilometers. That should be enough. Alone? With a minimal support group. Everyone who knows about this case can be counted on one hand. And it should remain so. Morozov looked out the window. Lake Baikal stretched out beyond the glass. Dark, calm, majestic. Under its deceptively peaceful surface hid 1.5 miles of black water. And at the bottom of this abyss lay something that made 7 experienced explorers whisper 2 words into the air and then disappear forever. When do we start? He asked. Tomorrow at dawn. Morozov, Glebov paused, choosing his words. I've been serving in the organs for 30 years. I've seen a lot. But this story is unlike anything else. Be careful, very careful. The captain nodded and stood up. He took a step toward the door, but the lieutenant colonel's voice stopped him. And one more thing, Igor Petrovich. If there really is something there, something that shouldn't be there, do you understand what needs to be done? Morozov understood. In his jacket pocket was a package with special charges. If what lay at the bottom of Lake Baikal turned out to be too dangerous for the human world, it would have to be buried there forever, even if that meant burying Captain Morozov himself along with it. He walked out of the office into the chilly autumn evening. The wind off the lake was piercing, but it was nothing compared to the chill he felt in his chest. Tomorrow he would descend into the heart of an ancient mystery. And it wasn't death he feared. It was that he would find something so alien to human understanding that it would change him forever. That he would emerge from the water a different person than when he descended. If he emerged at all, Baikal was silent. But in this silence one could hear expectation. Expectation of meeting someone who would dare to look into its deepest, darkest secrets. The night before the dive, Morozov did not sleep. He sat in his cabin on the research vessel Georgy Sadov, moored at the Listvianka pier, studying the Neptune 7 case file. In the light of a desk lamp, the faces of the missing scientists looked at him from photographs. Intelligent, passionate, enthusiastic people who just 2 weeks ago were alive and making plans for the future. Dr. Semenov, the head of the group, is a specialist in deep-sea acoustics, the author of a dozen classified works on underwater sound. His wife was expecting a child, Engineer Krasnov is the creator of unique equipment for recording low-frequency vibrations. Biologist Volkova has dedicated her life to studying Baikal endemics, those amazing creatures that have never been found anywhere else on the planet. The other four are young, talented, with glowing eyes. They all descended into the depths of the oldest lake on the planet and encountered something there that made them whisper into the radio. They are here, and then disappear forever. Morozov put the photographs aside and picked up a geological map of the bottom. Baikal is not just a lake. It is the most ancient fault in the Earth's crust, a rift that is 25 million years old. Traces of civilizations that existed long before the appearance of man could have been preserved in its depths. Or, even more frighteningly, these civilizations themselves. At 6 in the morning, there was a knock at his cabin. On the threshold stood a young lieutenant, Andrei Savliev, an underwater engineer who had been appointed as his assistant. "Comrade Captain, the apparatus is prepared for descent," he reported. "All systems have been checked twice." Morozov nodded and followed the lieutenant onto the deck. The dawn over Baikal was cold and gray. The lake lay motionless, like molten lead, and the low clouds were reflected in its surface. No wind, no waves. A dead silence that pressed on the ears. The deep-sea vehicle Russ rocked on the waves alongside the Sadov. It was the brainchild of Soviet designers and could withstand the monstrous pressure of 1.5 kilometers of water. A spherical titanium cabin with portholes, powerful searchlights, manipulators for collecting samples. It was a machine for exploring the abyss. "Have you checked the connection?" asked Morozov. "Yes, Comrade Captain. The underwater cable is designed for a depth of up to 2 kilometers. But what?" Savliev hesitated. "Yesterday evening, when we were testing the equipment, a strange failure occurred. The connection was interrupted on its own for a few minutes. And when it was restored, there were extraneous sounds on the air." "What sounds?" "Similar to those recorded by the group Neptune 7. As if something down there is actively jamming radio signals." Morozov chuckled. Baikal was full of mysteries. Magnetic anomalies, strange currents, inexplicable acoustic phenomena. Local shamans had considered the lake sacred for centuries, the home of spirits. Perhaps there was some truth in their superstitions. He went down into the Russ cabin. It smelled of metal, electronics, and that special smell of a confined space that every submariner knew. 2 chairs, a dashboard, monitor screens. His world for the next few hours. Savliev took the place of the second pilot. A young but smart guy. Morozov was glad that he would not have to go down alone. "All posts, this is Russ," he said into the microphone. "We are beginning our dive." The crane lifted the apparatus and slowly lowered it into the water. Baikal embraced them. At first, there was the familiar sensation of immersion, the play of light on the walls of the cabin. But already at a depth of 50 meters, it became clear that this lake was unlike any other. The water was too clear, too clean. Visibility reached 40 meters, an impossible value for a normal body of water. And there was something sinister in this crystal clarity, as if they were immersing themselves not in water, but in liquid glass, in a transparent void that allowed them to see too much. 100 meters, reported Savliev. Water temperature, 4 degrees. The first signs of life appeared on the echo sounder screens. Schools of Baikal omel, endemic crustacean Zepiscuria, which had been cleaning the lake water for millions of years. But the deeper they went, the less life there was. 200 meters, Savliev's voice sounded. "It's strange. There should be large schools of fish, but I can't see almost anything." Morozov frowned. Baikal was famous for its rich underwater life. Thousands of species, many of which were found nowhere else. But now, beneath them, a nearly empty mass of water gaped. 300 meters. We are receiving the first signals from the bottom. The relief appeared on the echo sounder screen. A flat, even bottom with small elevations. A typical landscape of a deep water plain. Nothing unusual. 400 meters. Comrade Captain, look at this. Savliev pointed to the sonar screen. Where there should have been a monotonous bottom, the device showed something strange. Geometrically correct structures. Straight lines. Angles, circles. A technical error? Morozov suggested. I don't think so. All systems are working fine. They continued their descent. 500 meters. 600. The water beyond the portholes darkened to blackness, and only the beam of the searchlight cut a narrow cone of visibility in this darkness. 700 meters. Savliev's voice became tense. Captain, I'm starting to hear them. What do you hear? Those sounds. From a recordings of the group, Neptune 7. They go straight through the water, bypassing radio communication. Morozov listened. At first, he heard only the familiar sounds of the apparatus in operation. The hum of the motors, the hiss of the life support system, the steady beating of the heart. But then, at the very edge of perception, he caught something else. Singing. Quiet, drawn out like a chorale. But it was not human voices that sang it. The sounds were too low, too resonant. They didn't just sound in the water. They penetrated it, turning the entire thickness of the lake into a giant resonator. 800 meters, Savliev whispered. We're at the same depth where the group disappeared. And at that moment, the rust searchlights illuminated something impossible. City. Not ruins, not archaeological remains. A city that looked as if it had been built yesterday, but according to architectural laws unknown to mankind. Spiral towers that went into the blackness of the depths. Platforms and bridges connected by graceful arches. Buildings that seemed to be carved from a single stone, but at the same time hovered in the thickness of the water, not touching the bottom. Oh my God, Savliev exhaled. Morozov was silent. His mind refused to accept what he had seen. Cities could not exist at the bottom of lakes, especially cities built using technologies that surpassed anything known to mankind. Base, this is Russ, he said into the microphone in a trembling voice. We've detected an object. We need immediate consultation with an architect and possibly a xenologist. There was no answer, only static, and through it, ever more clearly, that same singing, which now sounded not from far away but very close, as if the source of the sound was right in front of them. Morozov looked through the porthole. In the light of the spotlights, the city looked empty. But this was a deceptive impression, because deep in one of the spiral towers, movement flashed. And not just one. Something large, slow and graceful was moving in the thickness of the ancient walls. They are here, whispered Savliev, repeating the last words of the Neptune 7 group. And at that moment, the singing stopped. Absolute silence reigned in the water, a silence that was louder than any scream. The silence lasted an eternity. Morozov and Savliev sat in the titanium cabin of the Rus, not daring to move, and looked at the underwater city that should not exist. The spotlights of the apparatus illuminated only a small part of this architectural miracle. Several spiral towers, graceful bridges, passages that seemed to float in the thickness of the water, obeying some unknown laws of physics. Captain, Savliev called in a whisper, the connection with the base has been completely lost. I can't get through on any frequency. Morozov nodded, not taking his eyes off the city. He understood. They were now further from a human world than astronauts in orbit. 1.5 kilometers of Baikal water separated them from the surface, And between them and familiar reality lay an abyss inhabited by something ancient and powerful. Turn on the recording, he ordered. Everything we see must be documented. The Rust cameras began to record the impossible. The city was enormous, its borders lost in the darkness beyond the reach of the spotlights. But that wasn't the most astonishing thing. What was astonishing was that it was inhabited. The movement they had noticed deep within the towers increased. Figures began to emerge from openings that could be called windows or doors. Tall, graceful, completely unlike anything known to Earth biology. They moved through the water not by swimming, but as if dancing. Their movements smooth and hypnotic. These aren't fish, Savliev croaked. And they aren't people. What is this? Morozov didn't answer. He looked at the creatures that were now slowly approaching their apparatus and felt something changing in his consciousness. Fear was retreating, giving way to another feeling. Curiosity, or even admiration. The creatures were beautiful. Their bodies resembled humans, but were elongated, streamlined, and perfectly adapted to life in the water. Their skin shimmered with silvery blue hues, like scales, but was smooth. Their limbs were long, their fingers webbed, and their faces. The faces were almost human, but with huge, bottomless black eyes that reflected the wisdom of the ages. When they looked at the device, Morozov felt that these glances penetrated not only the titanium plating of the cabin, but also his own soul. They are intelligent, he whispered. Look at the way they move. It's not instinct. It's thinking. One of the creatures, perhaps the largest, swam up to the porthole and placed its palm on the glass. The fingers were incredibly long, graceful. There was no aggression in the gesture, more like a greeting or an examination. And then the most incredible thing began. A voice sounded in Morozov's head, not through radio, not through water, directly into his consciousness. The voice was ancient, deep, full of echoes of a time when the world was completely different. Finally, others have arrived from the upper world. Morozov shuddered. He glanced sideways at Savliev. It was clear from the lieutenant's face that he, too, heard something. Do not be afraid. We will not harm you. We remember the promise. Captain, Savliev said in a trembling voice, they speak to us, without words, straight into the head. Your predecessors, they were curious, like you. We showed them our city, our history. Morozov found the strength to speak. Where are they? Where is the Neptune 7 group? The creature at the porthole tilted its head as if listening. And then another voice, younger, more familiar, sounded in the captain's mind. Captain, this is Semenov. Dr. Semenov from Neptune. We are alive. We are here. Morozov's heart started pounding. Semenov, the leader of the missing group. Semenov, where are you? We came to look for you. We are with them. We have learned so much. Captain, it's incredible. They have lived here for millions of years before humans, before everything. Semenov's voice sounded strange. There was joy in it, but also something else. Detachment, as if he was speaking from a very distant place. They showed us the truth about the earth, about what was before us, and about what will be after. Semyonov, come to the surface. Immediately, Morozov shouted, although he knew he was shouting into the void. We can't, we don't want, it's so, calm here, so much knowledge. They teach us to see time as they. The creature at the porthole swam away, and another one swam up to take its place. Even more ancient, even more majestic. When it spoke, its thoughts were like the sound of the ocean, vast, all-consuming. We are older than your mountains. We remember the birth of this lake. We saw your kind take its first steps on Earth, and we know how it will end its journey. More beings gathered around the device. Dozens. They formed a circle, and their combined mental impact became almost unbearable. Pictures flashed in Morozov's head, visions of antiquity that his mind could barely process. He saw Baikal millions of years ago, when it was not a lake but a sea bay. He saw the first representatives of this race building their underwater city. He saw how the water level changed, how the climate became colder, how their civilization went deeper and deeper, adapting to new conditions. We do not die like you. We pass on knowledge from generation to generation, through touch, through thought. Your scientists understood this. They wanted to know more. Are they okay? Morozov said with difficulty. Semenov and the others. They ceased to be what they were, but become something more. They learn to see not only the present, but also the past and the future. Savliev grabbed Morozov by the hand. Captain, we must leave. Immediately. Something is happening to my consciousness. I am beginning to understand their language. Not translate, but understand, as if it had always been in me. Morozov felt it too. The mental presence of these beings was like warm water that slowly filled his mind. Pleasant, soothing. It carried knowledge, understanding, the wisdom of the ages. And it was incredibly seductive. Do not resist. Knowledge does not hurt. We will show you the secrets of the depths, the secrets of time. You will understand your place in the universe. Morozov's hand reached for the ascent controls, but the movement was sluggish, slow. Part of him really wanted to stay here in this underwater paradise of knowledge, where he could find the answers to all questions. Your friends are happy. They see the truth. Join them. Become a bridge between the worlds. And then, through the mental fog, another voice reached him. Weak but desperate. Morozov, Captain, don't listen to them. Run. Well, you can, they don't lie, but the truth kills humanity. I don't remember my name anymore. I only remember knowledge. Run. It was Semenov, the real Semenov, not the one who had spoken before. His human part, which still resisted the transformation. Morozov jerked the emergency ascent lever. The Russ's engines roared, and the craft began to rise. The creatures did not try to stop him. They simply watched him go, and their ancient eyes showed understanding and regret. They knew he would return, sooner or later, because the seeds of knowledge had already been sown in his mind, and they would grow. Captain, Savliev said breathlessly as the city disappeared into the darkness beneath them. What did we see? What was that? Morozov was silent. He raised the apparatus to the surface, to the world of people, but a part of him remained forever in those depths. Remained with the creatures who remembered the birth of the world and knew its end. And now this part whispered to him that humanity was only a fleeting episode in the history of the planet, that the true masters of the earth live not on its surface, but in its depths, and that one day they will reclaim the world that man temporarily occupies. But for now, he was silent. For now, he was rising towards the light, leaving behind the ancient darkness, full of seductive, deadly knowledge. The Russ emerged onto the surface of Lake Baikal at sunset. The red sun hung over the water, painting the lake the color of blood, and this ominous light seemed symbolic to Morozov. They had risen from the ancient darkness into the world of men, but they had brought with them something that would change them forever. The crane operator on the Sadov lifted the apparatus out of the water with his usual dexterity, unaware that he was pulling to the surface two people who were no longer the same. Morozov and Savliev left the titanium cabin silently, avoiding eye contact. They knew that one glance was enough to see in the pupils of their comrade the reflection of that underwater city that continued to live in their memories. Lieutenant Colonel Glebov was waiting for them in the wardroom, his face a mixture of hope and anxiety. He knew that if they had returned so quickly, they had either found answers or encountered something so terrifying that they had been forced to flee. "Well," he asked as soon as the door closed behind them, "what's down there?" Morozov sat down at the table, poured himself some water from a decanter, and drank for a long time, as if trying to wash the taste of antiquity from his lips. Savliev stood by the porthole, looking at the darkened water of the lake, and his lips moved silently. He repeated something in a language he had not known only yesterday. "A city," Morozov finally said. "An underwater city. Ancient. Inhabited." "What do you mean, populated?" Glebov leaned forward. "There live creatures. Intelligent ones. They call themselves," Morozov thought, trying to find words in the human language for the concepts that were transmitted to him telepathically. "Guardians. They lived in Baikal for millions of years. Before people. Before everything." The captain's voice was even, but Glebov, who had served in the organs for many years, immediately detected changes in it. Morozov spoke like a man who had seen too much, like a man whose world had shifted forever from its axis. "And what about the Neptune 7 group?" "They are with them. Alive, but—" Morozov paused. "They are no longer people in the full sense of the word. These creatures, they share knowledge through touch, through thought. Semenov and his team learned too much. Their consciousness expanded beyond the human." "Speak more clearly, Captain." "Their minds have become part of the collective mind of these beings. They see time not as a stream, but as an ocean. Past, present, and future are equal for them. They remember the birth of the planet and know how it will die." Savliev finally tore himself away from the porthole and turned to them. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, they offered us to stay. They showed us fragments of the truth. I saw dinosaurs drinking water from ancient Baikal. I saw the Ice Age. I saw how the first people came to the lake and bowed to its depths, not understanding who they were worshiping." There was the same detachment in his voice as Morozov's. Glebov realized that they were both infected. Infected with knowledge that the human mind was unable to digest without consequences. "Did you write anything down?" he asked. Morozov nodded and turned on a portable tape recorder. The sounds of the underwater journey poured out of the speaker, the noise of the engines, their own voices static, and then the singing they had heard from the ancient creatures began. But now, in the wardroom of the research vessel, these sounds acquired a new dimension. They penetrated not only into the ears, but also directly into the brain, bypassing the auditory nerves. Glebov felt his consciousness begin to expand, images and knowledge appearing in his head that were not there a second ago. He turned off the tape recorder with a jerk. "Enough," he breathed. "What was that?" "Their language," Morozov said. "It works not through words, but through the direct transmission of concepts. If you listen long enough, you begin to understand. And by understanding, you change." Glebov stood up and paced the cabin. His military experience told him that they were facing a threat that transcended all known classifications. This was not a weapon, not espionage, not sabotage. This was something fundamentally different, a challenge to the very nature of humanity. "What do they want?" he asked. "Nothing," Savliev answered. "That's the worst thing. They are not conquerors. They are not enemies. They simply exist, and they know that we are a temporary phenomenon, that our civilization is just a moment in the history of the planet. They are waiting for us to disappear ourselves, so that they can once again become the sole masters of the earth. But they are ready to share the knowledge," Morozov added, "with those who are able to accept it. The Neptune 7 group accepted it. Now they see the world through their eyes." Glebov stopped at a map of Baikal hanging on the wall. The lake looked like a harmless blue spot on it. But now he knew that beneath that blue was hidden a civilization 1,000 times older than humanity. "We can't let that happen," he said firmly. "If this information falls into the wrong hands." "What hands?" Morozov interrupted. "The hands of scientists who want to study them? The hands of the military who will try to use them as weapons? Or the hands of politicians who will try to negotiate with them? Any hands. Humanity is not ready for such knowledge, and they are ready to wait," Savliev said quietly. "They have been waiting for us for millions of years. They will wait just as long again." Silence fell over the cabin. Lake Baikal splashed overboard, and in this splash one could now hear the echo of ancient singing. Glebov understood that he was faced with a choice that would determine not only his fate, but the fate of humanity. "What do you propose?" he asked. "Forget it," Morozov said. "File a report on the technical failure. Write off the disappearance of the Neptune 7 group as an accident. Close the case forever. What they may contact themselves? They won't. They understand that we are not ready. Maybe in 1,000 years. Or in 10,000, when we become wiser, or when we're gone altogether." Glebov nodded. It was the only sensible solution. But deep down he knew the seeds had already been sown. The knowledge of their existence now lived in the minds of 3 people. And sooner or later this knowledge would find its way out. "Tomorrow we return to Moscow," he said. "The case is closed. Forever." Morozov and Savliev nodded, but their gazes were fixed on the windows, where Lake Baikal stretched out under the cover of night. They knew that they were leaving the lake physically, but that they would forever remain spiritually connected to its depths. That night, Morozov had strange dreams. He saw himself standing on the shores of a primeval ocean, watching the spiral towers of an underwater city rise from the water. He saw the first humans coming to Lake Baikal and hearing singing from the depths. He saw the future, a distant time when glaciers would once again cover the continents, and ancient guardians would rise from beneath the ice to inherit the empty planet. And in these dreams, he understood that the contact with them was not over. It had only just begun. Because knowledge, once received, can no longer be forgotten. It lives, grows and waits for its hour to manifest itself in full. In the morning, when the Sadov left Baikal, Morozov stood at the stern and watched the lake disappear over the horizon. And it seemed to him that a quiet singing was coming from the depths, a farewell song of ancient guardians who were letting him go into the world of people, knowing that he would definitely return. Because he wasn't just a man anymore. He was a bridge between 2 worlds, and that bridge would be used sooner or later. Moscow greeted them with gray October rain and the indifference of a big city. The plane from Irkutsk landed at Domodedovo late in the evening, and Morozov, looking out the window at the lights of the capital, felt like an alien returning to an alien planet. Just a week ago, this world seemed to him the only possible, understandable, and logical one. Now, every house, every car, every person rushing about their business looked like scenery for a play whose meaning had been lost. Savliev sat silently nearby. He had changed even more during these days. The lieutenant had almost stopped eating, slept in fits and starts, and stared at one point for hours, as if he saw something invisible to the others. Sometimes his lips moved silently, repeating words in that ancient language whose structure they had absorbed in the depths of Lake Baikal. Morozov understood his state. He himself had experienced something similar. The knowledge received from the Guardians was like a radioactive substance, invisible, but steadily changing everything around it. Glebov met them at the headquarters on Lubyanka. The lieutenant colonel looked tired and aged, as if the week of their absence had brought on several years of problems. He led them in his office, closed the door tightly, and turned on the wiretap suppression device. "Well," he asked without preamble, "is the report ready?" Morozov put a thin folder on the table. He worked on it the whole way, carefully filtering truth from lies, reality from fiction. "Technical accident," he said evenly. "The Neptune 7 group perished as a result of depressurization of the deep-sea vehicle at a depth of 800 meters. The bodies were not found, carried away by underwater currents. The cause of the accident was a design defect in domestically produced equipment." Glebov took the folder and leafed through several pages. The text was precise, convincing, and did not contain a single word about an underwater city or ancient guardians. An ideal lie, dressed up as truth. And the recordings? Those same voices? Acoustic interference caused by the features of the bottom relief of Lake Baikal. Not of scientific interest. "And you're ready to sign this?" Morozov nodded, but Glebov, who was carefully studying his face, saw what was hidden behind the external calm. The captain's eyes had changed. There was a depth in them that had not been there before, as if he was looking not at the world around him, but through it, seeing something hidden from the ordinary gaze. "Captain, I must ask you a direct question. What did you really see down there? And don't try to lie. I've been in the force long enough to know the difference between truth and fiction." Morozov was silent for a long time, looking out the window at rainy Moscow. Then he slowly turned to the lieutenant colonel. "I have seen the future of our planet," he said quietly. "A time when there will be no more humans. When cities will turn to dust and the oceans will once again be home to those who lived here before us. I have seen how small and insignificant our civilization is in the scale of cosmic time." "Morozov, you wanted the truth? Here it is. We are not the masters of this planet. We are temporary tenants, and the real masters wait patiently in the depths, knowing that sooner or later we will disappear ourselves, leaving nothing significant behind." Glebov turned pale. He realized that his worst fears had been realized. Morozov was infected with something that could not be cured by conventional methods. "Lieutenant Savliev," he turned to the young officer, "do you share the captain's opinion?" Savliev raised his head. His eyes were bottomless, like the waters of Lake Baikal. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel," he said, and his voice had overtones that should not be in human speech. "Knowledge does not ask permission to exist. It simply is, and when you receive it, you cannot give it away. I remember now what the dinosaurs remembered. I remember the birth of lakes and the death of glaciers. And this memory is not mine, but it is within me." Glebov stood up from his desk and paced the office. The situation was getting out of control. He had two subordinates who had become carriers of information capable of destroying the foundations of the human worldview. But what was worse was that they themselves were living proof of the existence of something beyond. "What do you propose to do?" he asked. "Nothing," Morozov replied. "We will live a normal life. Serve, work, follow orders. But we know what we know, and this knowledge will grow." Grow? The contact did not break when we rose to the surface. It continues. Every night, I hear their singing. Every day, I understand more. The language of the Guardians becomes more and more understandable to me. Savliev nodded. "And this is not only happening to us. There are people all over the world who feel the call of the depths. Oceanographers, submariners, deep-sea fishermen. The Guardians patiently search for those who are ready to accept the knowledge." Glebov felt a chill run down his spine. A picture of a global conspiracy was unfolding before him, but not a human conspiracy. Ancient creatures were slowly, methodically preparing the ground for something grandiose. "How many are there like you?" "Not many yet," Morozov admitted. "But the number is growing. In each generation, there are those who are able to hear the call. Children born near large bodies of water often have special sensitivity. And what will happen when there are enough of you? Nothing dramatic. Morozov smiled. And this smile was both human and completely alien. Humanity will simply begin to change, to evolve, to prepare for the time when the border between land and water will again become conditional. Silence reigned in the office. Glebov understood that he was on the threshold of a decision that could change the course of history. He could try to isolate Morozov and Savliev, hand them over to doctors, declare them insane. But deep down he knew that it would not help. The seeds had already been sown. The process had begun and could not be stopped. "The case is officially closed," he said finally. The Neptune, 7 group perished as a result of a technical accident. The Baikal sector is being transferred to a restricted access regime. The reason is increased seismic activity. Morozov nodded. A wise decision. Humanity will learn the truth when it is ready to accept it. And if it's never ready, then it will disappear, Savliev answered simply, and the planet will breathe a sigh of relief. They left Glebov's office, leaving the lieutenant colonel alone with a burden of knowledge he had not asked to receive. Their footsteps sounded normal in the corridors of Lubyanka, but every sound echoed in the depths, far underground, where ancient wisdom patiently awaited its hour. That evening, Morozov returned to his Moscow apartment. Everything was in its old place: books, photographs, familiar furniture. But now these things seemed to him to be artifacts of an alien civilization. He poured himself some tea, sat by the window, and began to look at the city. Millions of people lived their little lives, unaware that under their feet, in the depths of underground waters, in the thickness of the oceans, something ancient and powerful was awakening. He closed his eyes and immediately heard a familiar chant. The guardians were calling to him, sharing new fragments of knowledge. He saw maps of underwater currents, diagrams of deep cities, the faces of those people around the world who, like him, had become bridges between worlds. Soon there will be quite a lot of them. Soon a new era will begin, an era when humanity will learn that it is not alone in the universe, and that its neighbors live not in distant stars, but here on Earth, in depths that are older than any mountains, wiser than any philosophy. Morozov opened his eyes and smiled. A long, interesting life lay ahead. The life of a keeper of secrets, a guide between worlds. And he was ready for it. Far below, in the Moscow metro, the driver of an electric train suddenly heard a strange singing coming from the tunnels. He stopped the train, listened, but the sound disappeared. Only the strange feeling remained that somewhere deep underground something had stirred, woken up, and began to slowly rise to the surface. The era of the Guardians has begun. Time lost its usual rhythm. What had recently been a strict schedule of service faded under the pressure of a new life, a life divided between 2 dimensions. For Morozov, every morning became like an expedition into his own memory. He woke up, barely remembering who he was, where his body was, where his home was, and where the bottomless depths of Lake Baikal, calling in his dreams, were. It became especially stuffy in Moscow. People were hurrying about their business. Commuter trains were shuttering on turns. Officials and military men continued to play politics, as if no world catastrophe could happen. Only Morozov knew that the catastrophe had already happened. It was just that no one had seen it. He began to perceive the world differently. In the sound of rain, he seemed to hear the rhythm of underwater singing. In the glare on the asphalt, the mirror-like surface of a lake. In his dreams, he heard ancient names and formulas. Savliev disappeared suddenly. He simply stopped showing up for work, did not answer calls or knocks on the door. His things remained. The documents were in the desk drawer. The windows were closed. Officially, an investigation was underway, But Morozov understood. The lieutenant was no longer among people. The depth called one of its own, and he could not resist. At night, listening to the Baikal echo inside, Morozov felt the phase of disappearance. It was like a blurry spot in a dream. Just recently he was here, and now he belonged to another environment. The series of strange events grew. At the Irkutsk station, a biology professor fell into a coma after coming into contact with a frozen sample of Baikal water. In the port of Sakhalin, a team of fishermen reported silver ghosts in the waves. In Japan, China, and even in Europe, scientists recorded low-frequency waves of an unknown nature. These were not just scientific events, but signs. An ancient mind, absorbed in peace, began to awaken in various parts of the planet. Glebov was forced to initiate an internal investigation. He was tormented by dreams in which he himself was drifting in the abyss, full of knowledge he did not want. He met Morozov at an empty metro station closer to nightfall. Their conversation did not last long, but it was extremely frank. "You do understand that the virus is spread, right?" Glebov asked, leaning against the cold tile of the wall. "There's nothing that can stop it now." "It's not a virus," Morozov answered dryly. "It's evolution without our consent. We have to do something, Igor. People are disappearing. Doctors are going crazy. Some are developing a craving for water. Others are no longer afraid of death. I'm afraid to even think where this might lead. Fear is a protective reaction of mind. But what significance does it have for those who have outlived all gods and powers? We are an accident of history, a grain of sand in their evolution. They are an order that is 1,000,000 years old." The silence between them was long. Glebov looked at the mirror surface of the metro tunnels, which reflected the light of weak lamps. His fears suddenly gave way to some kind of mechanical submission. What will happen next? A change of eras, Morozov sighed. Some left, others came. People will not disappear immediately. No, it will be soft, patient, like a sea wave washing away the shore. Children will begin to draw circles and spirals that they have never seen. Scientists will work on theories to which an unknown hand pushes them. Artists will hear the music of the waves, and for the first time will think that such melodies are not a figment of fantasy, but an echo of a real old memory. "And you?" Glebov asked. I became a part of them earlier than I wanted, but there is still time to say goodbye to the familiar world." That night, Morozov collected all the papers, photographs, dive reports, and, leaving the apartment, went out to the river. It was raining, as always, but this time the water did not seem hostile to him. He threw the folders one after another, watched them soak, drown in the dirty, muddy water, a farewell wreath for the old century. In a deep sleep, he saw himself walking along the streets of an ancient city at the bottom of Lake Baikal. Spiral towers stretched smoothly upward. Translucent figures glided along them. Those same scientists, fishermen, children, artists who had already accepted the new essence. The world was no longer divided into light and darkness, land and depth, people and non-people. Everything was connected into one fluid system. When he came to, he felt the disease of human duality leaving his heart. He did not suffer, he waited. Reality was changing, humanity was changing, the world was preparing for the longest, silent immersion of its history. Everything changed in one day, not by chance, but with the inexorability of a tide. The icy wind of the morning Moscow brought news. Another young scientist had disappeared in Irkutsk, repeating the fate of Neptune, 7 on Baikal. The news network reported that an expedition of Japanese deep-sea divers had heard the voice of the gods in the depths, and 3 members of the team, after returning, voluntarily remained on the coast forever. building stone circles along the shore. Morozov understood that the point of no return had been passed. Now people were holding on between the two worlds only by virtue of their ancestral memory and fear of the new. But if they let go of the fear, the return to the source would begin. In the last days of his human life, he spent a lot of time outside. In the parks, he saw children playing with spiral toys, drawing strange symbols in the sand that they had never learned in school. In the markets, old women complained that the water from the wells did not smell like before, but had a strange, salty smell. A musician from the underground passage at the Reknoy Vauxhall Metro station played melodies that no one had heard before, but every dog, every cat in the area came to him and lay down at his feet. The world was moving towards a phase of integration, and Morozov was a witness and an instrument of this. The man and the guardian no longer fought within him. They became one. He heard the thoughts of other people's children, felt the worries of fishermen near Karelia, and felt the tidal wave of Lake Baikal and the world ocean equally. Sometimes it seemed to him that if he closed his eyes, he could emerge from any stream on the planet, because now water was his human blood. A new stage came unexpectedly. One evening, sitting by the window, he saw the reflection of the moon in a puddle begin to pulsate. Not light, but a rhythm that, if you listened closely, was imprinted in the heart with the phrase, time. It was a sign. Towards nightfall, he left the house, heading for the nearest water. He walked barefoot on the wet ground, feeling the coolness of the roots, and finally reached the Moscow River. The night was dark, but the water glowed from within with a faint greenish light, as if it had been waiting for him for a long time. He stepped through the melting snow to the very edge, dropped to his knees, and looked into the depths. "I'm ready," he said. "Take me home." The water was not cold, but soft and accepting. He fell into it not with his body, but with his mind, and the deeper he went, the more clearly he understood. The old fear was gone. Ambition, pride, old memories had fallen asleep. Only the purity of an open mind remained, into which ancient voices and knowledge flowed. The last thing he distinctly felt was his meeting with Semenov. He was no longer a man or a being. He was a vague silhouette in which all the great minds of humanity and the shadows of the very antiquity of water could be discerned. Welcome came an unexpected, living mental response. He saw, not with his eyes, but with a new being, all the cities lying at the bottom of lakes and seas, all the archaeological mysteries, unrealized inventions and dark legends that were kept in the water as a memory for future eras. He saw the children who grew up on the shores of Lake Baikal, and their games reflected the new music of the world. And suddenly everything disappeared. There was no man, no fear, no name. There was only a planet completely covered with water, and in this water, a silent but happy darkness. In a human world, dozens of radio stations went deaf. Deep waves from Lake Baikal filled the airwaves across Eurasia. Scientific reports recorded bursts of anomalies, and dozens of families along the shores of the lake stood at night by the water and listened to the silence filled with inner singing. Somewhere there, under kilometers of water, an ancient civilization celebrated the return of the prodigal children. And this was not the end, but the beginning of a new era of memory. An era in which humanity became an echo of the ancient abysses, finally remembering their true home.